Hi everyone, welcome to this podcast video. I'd like to start the video with an acknowledgement of country to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which we live and meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'll introduce myself. So my name is Vanessa. I am a Vietnamese Chinese Australian, and I'm very privileged to be part of a social impact project centered around gender inequality. So I guess the main focus of today's conversation is to kind of open up the kind of conversation around toxic masculinity and gendered stereotypes and roles mainly within the Asian context and community. And I have my wonderful guest speakers with me today. I have Hai over here and Truccie over here, who will be kind of sharing the lived experiences and their insights into this issue. So I'll get them to introduce themselves. Hai, why don't you tell me about a bit of background about yourself and what you do, and if comfortable, kind of share a personal story which kind of prompted your passion in this area.
Sure, yeah. First off, I'm Vietnamese Australian. I was born here in Australia. In terms of my background and experience and kind of what made me interested in this area, not so much gender inequality, but my background is in domestic violence. I've spent 10 to 11 years working with perpetrators of domestic violence, where gender inequality is a huge topic of that behavior. What inspired me to get into it is more personal experiences of domestic violence growing up. And so I kind of was really motivated to understand psychology as an area of study. So I have a master's in psychology. I'm a registered psychologist. And because of the specific experience with domestic violence growing up, I wanted to understand, the psychology of perpetrators of domestic violence. So, and once I got into it, I kind of never looked back because, it's an area that I'm quite comfortable with. I feel like I'm helping the community in some way. And it's just something that I think I have a particular, knack for. So, that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. And Truccie?
So I'm Truccie Nguyen. I'm a Vietnamese Australian. My background is a youth worker, social worker. I worked in 5-6 years in the youth area, mostly with young juvenile kids and adult home care, and also helping them reconnect back into the community. What got me into this kind of being a youth worker is I always wanted to make an impact in society, and especially with the young generation in today's community. And I also do volunteering work back home in Vietnam, where my parents are from as well. So, and I just want to help and make change in our culture and make something different with the community. So.
Thank you. So I might just get straight into the conversation. I guess we often hear things like, like man up or like toughen up, or, I'm going to make a very, general assumption that men are generally more uncomfortable kind of to share their emotions or seek emotional support, probably from like a young age. And it kind of exists in society, and it kind of has been there for a while. And I guess these kind of toxic behaviors then, as I get older, do have consequences on other members of society. So I guess, with that being said, I guess from your clinical experience, what are the sort of traits that you've seen in like the perpetrators, or even like, even if you have general visions as well, like the kind of what you've seen that kind of sings out as being like toxic masculinity?
Oh yeah, so some typical traits of toxic masculinity.
Like subtle ones and kind of like not so subtle ones.
I mean, the more explicit ones, and the term toxic masculinity, it's become so popularized these days. Everyone kind of has a sense of it, like what it might mean. So the most obvious ones I would say are things like, believing that women should stay at home and do the house chores and do all the child rearing, and men go to work and they're the ones in control of finances and decision making. Things like that are pretty obvious. Or that the genders should take up certain work roles if they're allowed to work or not. I think also things like homophobia is probably a really strong example of where masculinity becomes toxic. I think also more subtly it would be just the way that we have conversations about, as a man, this is from my personal experience, just as a man, we talk about women in general, where we are saying things that it kind of question how you can really have a healthy or equal relationship with a woman if you're talking in that way about women, you know? And so if you're not challenging each other about some of the beliefs or assumptions that are embedded in what you're saying, then it comes across as normalized, and so it's not very explicit or overt. So just the example would be probably just how we might describe women as being pretty hot or cute, but the language that we're using with it really makes them feel like sex objects, as opposed to, you know, out of respect or admiration for that quality. That might be like a more subtle one that is an example of a type of masculinity that may not be so helpful when it comes to having a relationship with that person of that gender, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like when you go, like, back then when I used to go clubbing, all the guys would be like, "Oh, she's so hot, bro. Oh, she's like so good looking." And I'm like, what?
And as like a woman, right? Do you feel good when someone says that about you?
No,
Do you feel like,
I feel like it's gross because, like, yeah, I dress up to look good to go out to have fun with my girls, but I'm not going out to seek attention from guys like that.
It's like
But the
unwarranted, right?
unwanted attention from guys at the club comes in, and they feel like looking at you down and stuff, and they think they're like, "I'll buy you a drink," and you'd be like, "Yeah, I'll hook up with you," kind of thing. I'm like, no, like it's so that's what I see. And I was like, I do have some guy mates, or I meet some guys along the way. They'll be like, "Oh, did you see? Is she hot? But are you gonna like talk to her like this? Like, are you gonna like give her a call? Like, don't call her yet. Like, wait a minute, kind of thing." Like, there's kind of like guy talking here. You're like, what?
It's almost like a sense of entitlement, right? And like, actually, personal story for me too. Like, randomly on my birthday, like years ago, I went clubbing with Jacob for the first time. Actually, my partner.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were just dancing on the dance floor, me and my girlfriends, and then this guy came up to me and was like, started trying to grab my hand, and I was like, no, like pushing away.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I walked away, and then he kept trying to persist, and I was like, no, and I walked away. And then only when Jacob came around and was like, hey man, can you like this is my girlfriend. Yeah. And funny enough, he was like, oh hey, sorry to him as opposed to me.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm the one who's in a situation here.
I know.
Like, what the hell? Like, and I guess that even like at the time, I didn't even recognize that as something as like, it didn't even occur to me because I'd obviously forgotten about it. I just, you know, my night was carried on my night. But then I remember like going home the next day. Jacob was like, I'm a bit annoyed. And I'm like, oh, like, how come? And he's like, I'm annoyed that he didn't apologise to you, apologise to me. And he's like, I own you or something. I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. I didn't recognise it myself.
That's a great example. So, like, that's a great example.
And I didn't, because I maybe happened so many times in the past that it didn't even occur to me that it was like a big issue, when actually it probably is. You know, like...
I mean, in that example as well, there's a you know, the question around what is subtle. In that example, another subtle kind of gender stereotype is that only when Jacob, your partner, stepped in to defend you, would this other man take that as, oh, okay, I better back off. As if women can't defend themselves or have their own voice type of thing as well. You know, so that's another subtle thing. If we're talking about toxic masculinity, like our understanding of, you know, embedded in that is gender inequality. You know, that women, when they say no, it's no. You know, we only listen when men, you know, talk to us. Exactly. Right. So something very subtle about that as well. You know.
And I think that's just so like it's an issue because it's like women say no, it's not taken seriously. That's when it escalates into into such you know, dangerous consequences for women. I'm guessing with your experience as well, you know that I know that you mentioned that you deal with a lot of perpetrators. And often not by their own their own voluntary choice to kind of be.
A lot of the perpetrators are mandated. To do groups and to get into interventions. That's certainly the case.
And is there a difference between those who, I guess, come to you voluntarily versus those who are kind of like mandated? Is there kind of attitude or behaviour that kind of expresses like, oh, no, I don't need this, I don't have an issue with this, I don't have problems. Do you get that kind of like vibe?
Definitely. Definitely, because, I think by and large, the most resistant clients will be ones who are mandated.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the motivation to want to be there, and they don't really see the point of it, and you know,
They're
Do
in the wrong.
Do they recognize their own problem?
often they don't.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more harder work. Yeah, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you get a mandated client who is coming in, they are mandated, but they've had enough conversations up to that point where they're very self-reflective and they've seen the harm that they've done, and the way that they're thinking and the way they're behaving is having a huge impact on their families and the relationships, their children.
Yeah. So it sounds like toxic masculinity, there's like, I guess, some obvious traits and not so obvious traits, but still, you know, it's still an issue. And I guess, Truccie, with your experiences with, I know you were a social worker and you worked in the youth detention centre. So working with youth, especially with male kind of...
it's a lot because they're working in a male dominant area, where it's like I'm working with them 12 hours a day. I'm with all these young people and stuff, and I see a lot of them. Like I work with sex offenders, abusive, and their backgrounds being abusive and stuff. And one thing from them is that we, like, every time I work with them, I feel like I'm getting to know them more and more. But at the same time, some young people don't think they're in the wrong, and they feel like they need to be strong because they're in an environment where they like survive for themselves. Basically, like, I need to be the tough one here, so nobody could bully me, nobody could like come near me because I need to be the top dog kind of thing in there. And I see some of the boys, like the language they talk to each other in the basketball, sitting down, the boys like, oh, bro, like, what the fuck, we feel sway. But then when they're with me on like one-on-one and doing activity, they're so different. They don't put on like, they're nicer to me. They like tell me their story, like their families, like their brothers, their partners and everything. But when I see like them with the group, their peers, they're totally changes and different and stuff.
I think that's a really good example because even the terminology toxic masculinity, it's a little bit problematic because if you were to talk to a group of boys, for example, in your context, and you said to them, like, we're going to talk about toxic masculinity today and what that means and how that can be problematic, it can be a real turn-off for boys and men in general. Yeah. Because we don't want to be told, like, our masculinity is toxic. That doesn't sound, that would be like saying, like, oh, toxic femininity. It's like, it wasn't like... Yeah. There's a lot of positive to, masculine ideas. It's probably better to say, like, there are dominant forms of masculinity that some men and a lot of men do subscribe to, like those boys, like they're subscribing to this alpha dog persona, but you think about, like, what's the function of that? If they're trying to survive in that context and not be bullied by these other juveniles, of course they're going to take up this hyper masculine identity, but then behind doors with you, they're much more connected to maybe a bit more open, a bit more vulnerable, a bit emotional. So I think even the language that we use to try to challenge masculinity can be changed a little bit too. So we don't, not rely on toxic masculinity, but just describe it as, there are some dominant forms of masculinity that aren't helping us, be better people or be, connected with our relationships as we want to be. And so there's something there in your story.
So. And it almost sounds like these boys are opening up to you. I wonder if it's because you have that with women that have seen as that kind of nurturing kind of support.
That's part of it. That's part of it.
And so, like, I wonder if that kind of, like,
I reckon it was because when I was working in the juvenile sector, I have one client. He used to always lash out. He always get angry at almost every male staff member. But when I talk to him, I talk to him in a calmer sense of way. But he opens up to me, and I think he opens up to other female staff as well. It's just the way we more like nurture, more easygoing, because some male staff comes in and was like, oh, okay, boys, we're gonna go here, like trying to act tough or trying to be like, hey, boys.
The staff member.
Sometimes some of the boys like trying to be like friendly with them, kind of thing, and some of the boys be like, oh, okay, let's do this, of course. And then other staff members, they will play basketball, they would go take the boys to the gym and stuff. And with me, I don't play sports, so I just sit with the boys. I'm like, do you want to have a chat? And then what I connect to them is through like cooking activity and stuff. And then I do activity for them to open up to me. Yeah, and not in a sense of just sitting down there talking about like, oh, let's play basketball through that kind of like male, because you know they're all trying to be like male are more better at sport, that kind of term you kind of hear, and they play that, and I just sit there and I'll be like, hey, do you guys want to go cooking? Can I have a cooking class? They're like, yeah, sure, and then they open up to me more in a sense, and I'm kind of the type of person that's easy to talk to in a way. Yeah.
So what I would love to see in that context is some of those male workers like flip the narrative, you know, have the male worker do activity that maybe be perceived as a female stereotype role, like be the cook or something like that.
We do have that as well, and some of the boys were like, oh yeah, I'll go to see what like Joe's cooking. Like, I want to go see what Joe's cook. Or Joe's because Sunday is like normal our free day, and then we'll do whatever we do. And then sometimes we have like a male staff member, for example, like Joe will be like, oh, I'm gonna go in the kitchen and cook, and the boys will be like, oh, Joe's cooking today. Can he even cook? Okay, let's go see what he's cooking up, kind of thing.
So I think that's beautiful, because if we're talking about challenging dominant forms of masculinity, where does that come from? I think it comes from both. I think it's led by ourselves as men having to challenge ourselves. With some collaboration with other genders, whether they be female genders or even the LGBTIQ plus spectrum. You know, but it is really led by ourselves wanting to change first. And saying, like,
definitely.
Because, you know, the cooking example is such a really interesting example, because I always think about some of the most well-known chefs in the world. And they're all males. And so I can't understand how... where did it come that the female gender is like...
It's like meant to be cooking and stuff.
So that's always really puzzled me. So yeah, I think there's some sort of like challenging ourselves, like, no, like men can be good cooks, but not... Like both genders can be good cooks, but we should embrace it like more as like we should be good cooks just on a daily basis. We don't have to be like doing this for a profession or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess, Truccie, with your example working in the youth, you know, centre, do you know, like with the, I guess, demographic of youth, male youth especially in there, where they come from a quite difficult, kind of challenging, toxic upbringing, and is that the majority of the people there? Is that where they kind of like had those issues from? Or you know, were they the ones who just came in and did something wrong, and they had like a you know, a bit more of a healthy background?
Mostly of the boys that are all from backgrounds with like abusive backgrounds or really hard upbringings, and I do feel for them, because when they're coming in here, like you could tell they're becoming like they open up to you, and they're all like, some are from a background where they never lived with their parents before. They never see their parents, live with the grandparents, because the parents were drug users and the parents had been in and out of jail and stuff. We get heaps of that. Or we do get like one case where the grandparents were sexually abusing them. It's all sort of thing, or they've been part of a family violence, or they've been part of the wrong gang. They go out, hang out, school wasn't for them, so they go and join a gang or kind of thing. There's we do have one odd occasion here and there, so like one kid might be from the wealthy family and they've been in here because they did something wrong, kind of thing. It's one off, and you could see the dynamic really different from an upbringing, from a kid from an upbringing background who is wealthy, goes to a private school, has an education, has everything, to a kid who has never been to school, say in their life they've been to school 10 times, they've been living on the street, and you see how they interact. It's very different, and it's always the kid from the rich family, the good upbringing always gets the privileged kids basically always get the bully kind of thing, because they're known to be weak and soft, and then the kids who's out on the streets are the tough ones. So you see that in there. You see that when I was in the juvie, you see that difference. You're like, oh, okay.
That's so interesting. And I guess like clinically as well, do you like, I guess with the perpetrators that you work with, do you know if they come from obviously diverse backgrounds? Like, do you know if most of them have like a difficult upbringing as well, or is it, do they all like, is there, I guess in your experience, do you know if there's a bit of a, I guess, difference between different groups of people with you know, domestic violence and
I mean, for the domestic violence part, in my experience, it is mostly diverse, but I can't deny that if you have a really terrible upbringing, like your risk of perpetrating some of these behaviors in your own life goes up. So there are risk factors and contributing factors where being raised in a house full of domestic violence is not giving you a good chance to, you know,
set you up.
set you up to be free from that in the future. There's a good chance that the cycle will continue unless there's some sort of prevention. Unfortunately, in more cases than not, an incident happens and therefore you go into intervention. So after the fact, in terms of like then broadening the questioning to where does dominant forms of masculinity come from, and not just focusing on domestic violence, you know, it could be part of that, like, because I'm hearing like kids getting abused in their in their family relationships. It makes sense to me that if it's a boy or a girl, if you're being abused or you're having a terrible upbringing, you're going to have to defend for yourself. And if that means being the toughest version of yourself, and you're a boy, and that happens to make you look more like a boy, that's what you're going to do. And this is on top of, like, you know, getting social media messages, you know, like 80s and 90s when the hyper masculine, like Arnold Schwarzenegger type, you know, and now we got like Thor, you know, like he's the real man, you know, that type of thing. So on top of that layer of social media messaging and that upbringing, it makes sense that, you know, we got these dominant forms of masculinity. Whether it becomes toxic or not, that comes down to choice, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of like external factors. You mentioned like social media, you know, you've got like your family upbringing, other people, all these influences coming towards you. And so all these different factors when you're kind of growing up, right? And so what kind of age is when all these kind of traits are then internalized and then you don't realize anymore that this is even toxic? Like, do you know what I mean? I don't know if you would know.
That's very different and cool. I don't know, some like the young people I work out or in the community and stuff, and some of them kind of pick up like, oh, my dad is abusive. Like they know straight away. And they'll be like, I'm never going to be like my dad. My dad is abusive. Or like someone will be like, oh, my dad would like yell at my mum, so I would yell at my girlfriend sometimes too because I picked that up like that. And they tell me that. And I was like, oh, I'm like, it's good that you know that that's not right. Yeah, you kind of awareness, but and I was like, that's good. But some kids do, some no. It just depends on the people they're around with as well. Because, for example, if you're in a group of 5 boys and then they're all from the same area, they're all from the same upbringing, and it's like, oh well, if your dad's yelling and hitting you, and my dad's doing it to me too, and my dad's and this other person's doing it as well, I'm like, oh, it's normal then. It's normal kind of thing.
The social context, like plays a really big part. It does. In kind of like making it like. You know, making it more severe in that case. So,
and in Truccie's answer there, we can hear that it starts at an early age. I would reflect there that it's as far as you can remember, you know, and even beyond that perhaps as well. Like when you can't even remember, you're still picking up stuff, and it can come from that idea of, you know, if you're being directly abused, but if you're taking the abuse away and you're talking about just where do we learn masculinity from, like, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but with the way we our child rearing practices, you know, dressing a boy in blue versus dressing a girl in pink, giving toy cars to a boy versus dolls to a girl. So you started to learn, you know, gender stereotypes
at a young age.
Depending on, you know, your parents. Culture is a big part of that too.
Even like today's society, when we do gender reveal, blue is for
it's still happening. It's still
like blue is for boy, pink is for girl.
That's right.
Kind of thing.
That's right.
And we see that so much on social media these days because everybody's doing gender reveal. Like
If when we're asked the question, if there's a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, or 3-year-old birthday party, and we're asking the question, what do we get? What do you want for a gift? And they say, whatever. Then we have to come up with a gift. What's a likely type of gift we get for a boy versus a girl? And then we're teaching them stuff with that. And I think there's an argument down, you know, some people have made, like, boys get, you know, given guns as gifts. As an example. So, you know, things like, small things like that, you just start learning gender stereotypes.
It's true. Like, even like, I remember back then was little, like, my mom and dad would be like, so I used to have short hair, and then my mom and dad,
like really short hair,
like I had short hair, like, and my mom would be like, oh, we'll grow her hair out, but I was like, I like you have long hair more, I don't like you have short hair, you look like a boy.
I get you.
Even like, even today, I have short hair.
The way you dress, the way you
look, even like today, because my hair used to be long, and and I'll cut it because it's like dead from all the dyeing and stuff. My dad was like, oh, I like your hair longer. You look more feminine. You look more like, you know, girl. And I'm like, what's wrong with my hair now? It's still fine. He's like, it's nothing wrong, but I feel like you'd be more feminine. I'm like, how?
Right?
I feel the same thing about eyelashes.
Yeah.
I question this. I question this because we're talking about hair length, and my partner, she got some eyelash, like, you know, I don't know. Yeah, and I was like, my immediate reaction to that was like, they look pretty.
Yeah.
But then I stopped myself and questioned, like, I don't understand why I think they look pretty. I don't understand the function of eyelashes. But somehow I think at some point in my upbringing, I was taught eyelashes are somehow more pretty, unless it's a biological thing. But I do not understand the actual function of longer eyelashes.
Saying that, like,
because if I put eyelashes and as a man, the social perception of that would be, I'm either gay or I'm, transgender or something. Yeah. So I do not understand it. And yet I also have the feeling, they are pretty.
Yeah.
But I question it. I question it. And I think that's the first step. You know?
Yeah. Just questioning, right?
Just questioning. Just having the open conversation is always the first step. Yeah.
Just being open about it and talking and questioning it. And that's like, but I remember like some of my nieces and nephews, they have long eyelashes as well. My nephew, and they were like, oh my God, you have long eyelashes like a girl. It's so pretty. I was like,
the language around that is so clear.
You can
There's
see
a very clear gender stereotype around eyelashes.
Yeah, I was like, you have long lashes, like really nice, like a girl's eyes, like long lashes. I was like, but you say like the same in Vietnamese. You think I'm like,
what's a Vietnamese saying?
I think it's like, lòng mi dài, nhắm con gái. And I was like, how's it like a girl? Like, how?
Yeah. There's nothing inherent about it, is there?
Yeah.
That makes it a girl thing or a boy thing.
Yeah.
It must be socially constructed at some point.
Yeah.
And I guess from your perspectives as well, do you feel like the gender roles and stereotypes, or personality kind of, I guess, traits and behaviors are more, I guess, worse in Asian communities or Asian contexts, or is it kind of a similar across the board? Like, I feel like it can be kind of like a bit stronger in some of the Asian communities.
Yes and no in some sense. So if we're going to talk about mental health wise, into the Asian culture, it's like males will never be sad. Males don't feel depressed and everything. And then like in nowadays, people, like everybody has mental health. Like everybody knows what mental health is, but in the Asian culture, they don't really understand that. And coming from my experience, like I suffer from depression, anxiety, and then I have people in my family who has depression, anxiety as well. And I remember when I brought up the idea to my dad, I'm like, Dad, I think I have depression or anxiety, and my dad was like, depression, anxiety, like what's that? Like, mental health. He's like, what's mental health? Like what's that? He's like, no, you don't feel that, like, or anything. And I'm like, you know, you're just fine, you're just stressed, like you don't worry about it. And I was like, no, like this is how I feel and stuff. Or even like, because my younger brother, he's gay, so, and then when my younger brother tells my parents that, he came out, and then my dad was like, oh my God, this is not how it is meant to be. Like you're not meant to be liking a guy. You're meant to be all, you know, like boy girl together, not boy like kind of thing. Like there was like that whole stereotype. But now he's like, he came around, he understands and accepts it better. I think it's just, you need to just educate your parents, you know, because since I educate my parents, because I work in this field, like I used to be a youth worker, and then my youngest brother, he works in like the child protection. That's why he's a psychologist. He's a social worker, and then my middle brother, he's studying counselling. So we educate our parents to understand what mental health, and male can feel sad, male can be like this, and even females can feel sad as well. Like it's of course to everybody. Like mental health does not discriminate anyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Truccie. That obviously a lot of personal stories in there. So I feel like you sharing, opening up, so you know, you kind of lead with that. And I guess part of it as well, I would say, is to do with like the I guess, intergenerational trauma, I guess, immediately, like, as refugees come into the country and everything, they want to deal with all that trauma that they probably haven't addressed.
Exactly, yeah.
And it kind of just manifests to the next generation, with the upbringing, so then I guess when they have that pent-up trauma that they're not addressing, and it's kind of like then bringing it onto then kind of putting it onto their kids, and then they grow up like that, I guess kind of where it kind of come from.
Yeah.
And like especially with like what you just mentioned there with the whole mental health, like not existing, like in like your dad's mind, like doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I like like you said how trauma comes from overseas. Like my parents came here with like nothing, and then all they know is work, save up, bring up a best the possible thing for my kids, kind of work. So they don't really think stress or mental health is a big issue. They're just like, it's nothing kind of thing. But I think nowadays, like I start seeing people more in my family, especially in my family, like I have a lot of people in my family has depression or and stuff, and like my aunties, my uncles, like my cousins and stuff, they're like understanding what mental health is, which is really good and stuff as well. So they're coming around, because the trauma of them coming to a new country is big. Because you don't know anyone. You come here starting new and everything. Yeah,
there's a lot of, I guess, like, that should be addressed with that itself. And I guess now with, like, the new generation coming, with who wouldn't, I guess, have that kind of grow from that now. It's good to kind of see some change. I don't know, I feel like there's a bit more progress in the sense that there's a bit more acceptance, I guess, with, like, amongst the younger community anyway, about like if someone's gay or someone's trans. It's like so much. There's no real like. It's not like a really big deal anymore. No. But it's obviously within like within our younger. But I guess with like you mentioned like your parents were some time to go around, but there's still hope that they still kind of come around. So there is a chance for them to kind of change their thinking. After so long. Yeah, definitely. Because
it's weird because when my brother came out to my parents, it was so weird. But Dad was like, oh, this is not right, like you need to get him checked out, like it's not right, this is not how it is. And in the Vietnamese culture, someone gay is like a big like disown in the family, oh my god, like it's something wrong with me. Like did I do something wrong? The parents start taking on the responsibility, like, did I do something wrong? We're like, no, you didn't do anything wrong, we're just perfectly fine, like we're happy. It's just that we don't live like how you think it should be, like kind of thing.
There's so much expectations.
There's expectation, and they
beliefs that haven't questioned for so long.
It's like new to them, kind of thing. And I think it's just that, like I said, start questioning, start talking, and that's where things start changing.
Yeah, look, on that point of like starting to question, I think that's the second thing to add to that as a practical consideration is what you were saying there about. Particularly what you were saying about our parents having come from intergenerational trauma, and for the big thing with the Vietnamese community, it was the Vietnam War for a long time, and a lot of displaced families during that time, and we all actually come from different. I think you mentioned the Philippines.
Yes, I was born in the refugee camp.
Yeah. This is off camera. So Philippines. Whereas my parents went to Japan. And then you have families. You go to America, Germany, a whole bunch of places. And so part of asking the question, having the conversation, I feel like so much of it is a two-way street. Like as a younger generation, we're needing to understand, asking that question back to them, like, why are you so shut off from your emotion? Because a lot of time, in my own experience, I grew up with, as I mentioned, without going into detail, I mentioned some domestic violence in my household. Growing up, and I resented my father so much. But then I asked him the question, like, why is it the way he is? Like, he grew up with no dad himself because his father died in the Vietnam War. He grew up in poverty because he had a family of 12 and his mom was single. He was the youngest as well, but also the brightest, so he had the most potential, and so all this burden on top of him to like succeed and everything. He never met his potential because the Vietnam War like just devastated everything and just shut off his opportunity to go to America to study further. He had to go to Japan, learn a different language, Japanese, go to Australia, learn another different language, learn English. And then he spent the last 30 years working as a factory worker, after all of this. Now that guy, if we're talking about emotion for that guy, he has no time for emotion. He just has to get it done. He's got shit to do, you know.
Yeah.
Places to be.
Places to be, you know, tasks to do.
Tick off those.
I didn't see that as a child.
Yeah.
You know, all I cared about, like, I was, you know, getting this type of abuse. And I was like,
Yeah.
you know, he's being really strict on me and so on and so forth. So I do feel it's a two-way street. If our goal is to challenge, you know, toxic masculinity, dominant forms of masculinity, and have a way forward, because we don't want them to push back and be like, well, you know, you're challenging my authority or whatever. It's like, I'm not challenging. I'm just asking like an open question. Like, is there a better way to move forward in terms of mental health, or how we look after each other in the family, or how we bond as, you know, father and child, or, you know, father and son, whatever. So, yeah, you know, have the open conversation, but the second way is a two-way street. Be curious about the other person as much as you invite them to be curious about you, I would say.
Thank you for sharing that story. I didn't
that's
realize there was like, you know, that whole history behind like.
Yeah, I think we all have some story.
With our parents especially. There is some sort of like, I think the common thing is the whole hard like coming from a kind of war kind of torn country to like a new country, having the language, having to learn the cultural, you know, cultural kind of
new
like
norms and stuff. It's
a whole thing, and then on top of that, you deal with the repressed trauma that you've had to, you know, kind of put aside for a second.
That's right.
With your own survival So there's just so much to it, and I guess
which is funny because you're asking them to understand your mental health. When they don't even understand their own mental health. And this is the reality. They're just in complete, you know, denial of it, or you know.
That's true.
Because surely some of these individuals have PTSD. You
for
can't
sure.
go through a war and not have
Yeah.
at least something, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, you know, substance abuse, for example, is
Yeah.
a probably clear example of that.
Yeah.
There will be people who come to Australia, haven't dealt with their PTSD, and like, you know, unfortunately.
Everyone has their own coping mechanisms. Deal with that kind of trauma. So.
I was going to say, on top of culture though, probably religion is more difficult to work with, I would say.
Is it?
Because you asked the question, like, does culture, like, can you see more of the gender stereotypes more exacerbated in certain cultures?
Yeah.
I would say yes, but I would say religion makes it even, like, that's probably for me, in my experience, religion is the one that's harder to get around, because with culture, you can be like, oh, you know, this is how it worked in your country. You know, this is how Australia has different understandings. And you kind of have that conversation. Sometimes, though, with religion, it's almost like black and white for some people, where it's kind of like, my religion tells me this, and this is how it is. I can't go against my God or whoever they worship. I reckon that's a bit more
I didn't think like that.
That's another factor. I'm just
Yeah,
good point. I didn't even,
culture, religion, all of it.
There's so many different, like, so many things like that can kind of like contribute to this whole, you know, toxic masculinity. So
gender norms. Definitely.
It's like my dad's outlet of being like getting his stress out is drinking. He drinks a lot, and I remember when I was little, he would drink, and then he would sometimes lash out at us and stuff. And I used to be so angry. I used to be like, "Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just sitting here watching TV, and you're yelling at me for no reason. Like, why?" But then
all that pent up stuff.
And then my dad's like, he's kind of old school Vietnamese, and he would be like, I need to provide for you guys. And he's like, no, you don't. Like,
probably disciplinary. Was he the disciplinary in your household as well?
Yes and no, because my mum was disciplinary.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Mum was too.
But I felt like my dad almost like...
But my dad would go to all my parents' teacher interviews. My dad would do all the paperwork, like, you need to fill the paperwork. My dad would do everything. Exactly. My mum wouldn't do it. Mum would be like, give it to your dad. Who would do it? Like, what's that? And I always would be like, mum would be in the kitchen. Mum would be like at home.
That reinforces that kind of behavior though. That reinforces that kind of messaging that, I guess, about women roles, I guess.
Oh,
definitely.
Vietnamese culture is pretty big on that.
It's very big, like, and even till today's society, and I question my parents all the time. Like, my dad and mum, they go to work, and then mum will come home, and she will be in the kitchen cooking dinner, and dad will come home.
Works though, right?
Yeah, she works too.
So it's like...
And then dad will come home, and dad will be like, oh, what's for dinner, or like, whatever. And mum was like, oh, this. And then my dad's like, oh, okay. And I was like to my dad, why don't you go make dinner? You could do it. He was like, I just come from work. And I'm like, I just come from work. Mum just coming from work. True just coming from work. Or Robert just coming from work. Like, you go make dinner. He was like, why can't you make me dinner? And I'm like, why can't you?
Yeah. Again, this is a great example of like, because we're talking so much about the Vietnamese culture and the intergenerational of it. Like, I'll put a scenario out there to as a, you know, and I love to hear your reflections. But so men go to war. Yeah. You know, that's a very typical thing, right? Particularly during the mid 1900s. So from if you're talking about the Vietnam War, all the men go to war, all the soldiers, who's at home taking care of the families? By default, it's going to be the mums, right?
The mums, yeah.
Right? And whether that come from the idea of men are stronger or you know, whatever. Yeah. But because of that decision, social, like as a military decision, social decision, you have this separation of roles just by that alone, right. Whether we liked it or not. That's just how it is, right?
Yeah.
And then that carried on to like, okay, the war's over. Yeah. Mums have been at home all this time. What are dads going to do now? So I imagine, well, you know, I'll go work and I'll make some money and bring it home. Yeah. But I feel like, you know, it's the masculinity thing comes out of that. It comes out of things like, you know, kings.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. So the Empire days.
The Empire days, right? Yeah. So there's a king, and the king has multiple wives. And, you know, I want a son as an heir. And so that, like, there's so many different ways that masculinity, dominant forms of masculinity, and then whether we say that's toxic or not. Yeah. So a guy goes to war and has to, you know, die for his country. Yeah. I'm personally not going to call that toxic masculinity. I'm going to be like, well, you know, he did something that was called upon at the time for his country, whether it was the right side of the war or not, I don't know. It would be the same thing for American soldiers coming to Vietnam, right? So, and then they come back and then they fall into these roles and they holding these ideals and these values about what it means. So, look, the question then becomes like, how much of that is useful now when there's no war, you know, when peace times. Yeah. That's the question. That's the real question. Yeah.
That's exactly. I guess like now when things are changing, it's like I feel like there's been an openness to change as well.
Yeah.
Your own beliefs. And it's hard, I guess, when
it is.
You had that mindset for so long. It's like how can you how can they challenge themselves? Also have like making sure that they're, I guess, when they have children, I guess having those making sure they grow up not having the same kind of like of thinking as well.
Yeah, or at least not the rigidity, you know. The flexibility to be like, you know, if you feel like that's a positive trait that you want and that serves you well and that's adding a positive aspect to your relationship, all more power to you, you know. But if there's, particularly when we talk about, you know, my area, which is domestic violence, but also juvenile detention and juvenile delinquency, you know, if there's certain forms of masculinity that aren't serving you, then you ought to look at that or at least challenge it.
I feel like we've talked about this all day, but I feel like we should start just wrapping up now. So I guess to end the video, the podcast, what is one, I guess, key takeaway that you want listeners to kind of like walk away the conversation from? Like, what do you want them to be like, hey, this is what I got out of the conversation and this is what I want to take away? What would you kind of put out there?
For me, it's just start a conversation with your friends and family and just start talking and being open at different topics. I start talking to my families, and me and my dad, we're close. We talk about any topic and it comes up about like masculinity, about like anything. So, and always remember that everybody has their own stories. So you're gonna just be careful, and everybody's going through stuff. I want you to take away from that, and that nobody is like gonna discriminate you if you don't feel okay. Like mental health is everywhere. So I want you that it happens in everybody. So don't feel like you're alone if you don't have no one, because other hotlines to help you, like kids help lines and social medias and someone just reach out, then someone will listen.
As well.
Yes. That's all. Definitely.
Yeah, you've covered a lot there, Truccie. What do I add to that? Everything you said there, totally agree with. I guess a final thing for any listeners, watchers of this podcast, Kuna. Look, I think we're in interesting times in 2022,
Mm.
where there's a younger generation of individuals who are already challenging dominant forms of masculinity, and trying to, and also like even the LGBTIQA plus community was not really a huge thing, say 40, 50 years ago. Obviously their presence was there, but you know, in terms of their voice nowadays, it's much more present. I feel like in all of this, the way forward is constantly trying to listen for and understand each other's needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're man, woman, transgender, whether you're old, young, if I listen to your needs and you listen to my needs and I try to make you feel safe and comfortable and you make me feel safe and comfortable, we're going to have a great time.
Yeah.
We're going to have a healthy, constructive relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also on top of that is to challenge yourselves to be better. Like once I hear your needs, you hear my needs. It starts with me. Like if I can serve your needs by changing something of mine and show you the positive role modeling from that,
Yeah.
and hope and invite you to do the same,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we're going to have a great relationship.
Yeah,
And this is not
definitely.
only just for, you know, parents and children, intimate relationships, but also the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my message. That's what I take into my personal life and clinical work. So yeah, hopefully that's a bit of wisdom there, but yeah.
Yeah,
That's it.
no, I think that was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, both of you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
for
for your
having us.
time. Well, you had such a you both of you had you shared your lived experiences
Yeah.
and I guess your experiences with what you do for work, and I guess that really provides much inside value to this conversation. I really appreciated it. So yeah,
Thanks for having
you so much.
us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, yes, really interesting.